We were talking about Egypt and their failed invasion into Israel with the Yom Kippur War and the subsequent oil embargo, and then the Camp David Accords. So you've got tension there in the Middle East still, but right around the same time in 1975, Lebanon is engulfed in a civil war. And you have to understand how bizarre this is because in Lebanon, which you see just north of Israel, Lebanon had really been an area that was known for its strange diversity. That you had Muslims and Jews and Christians who all lived in the area and got along remarkably well for a long time. In fact, one of the ways in which they were able to maintain a good status quo where everybody managed to get along so well is that certain positions were reserved for certain individuals. For example, the president of Lebanon had to be a Christian, and the prime minister had to be a Muslim. And so they were like, by basically keeping the government positions reserved for certain groups like Christians and Muslims, they were able to make sure that there was a spirit of cooperation and that every religion, at least the major religions, were well respected and people got along. And unfortunately, that nice coexistence doesn't last forever. Unfortunately for them, there's an argument about what to do regarding the Palestinians and the Palestinian Liberation Organization and people who wanted to attack Israel. You see right here what's going to happen in Lebanon. There's going to be a division amongst the Christians and the Muslims. You can see that Lebanese Christians were mostly based in this area, and that's the territory that they largely are going to control. And Lebanese Muslims and the PLO are down here in the southern part. And the argument between Christians and Muslims in Lebanon results because the Muslims who were in Lebanon wanted to assist the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, stage attacks on Israel. They wanted to give the Palestinians safe harbor, places to live and to essentially train. And the Christians were like, no, we don't want to do that. We think that's a terrible idea. Don't go and provoke Israel. They're already in a foul mood because of the Yom Kippur War. And we don't want to mess with that. And as a result, the Christians and the Muslims essentially go to war with one another. And this war lasts more than 15 years. This civil war will not be resolved until 1990. And if that didn't complicate matters enough, you also had the Syrian military get involved. Because Syria is right next door, they saw this as a bit of an opportunity. Now, they claimed that they sent in their military just to maintain order and some sense of stability, but that's not the reality of it. They're there fighting both groups. They're fighting against both the Muslims and the Christians. So you essentially have a civil war, and the Syrian military jumps in. The United Nations tried to jump in and assist and create a peacekeeping force, and the United States got involved too. And of course, that was a train wreck. It probably was highlighted by an explosion or an attack in 1983 at an American Marine barracks in Beirut, where over 300 Americans are killed as a result. People in the United States were basically like, this is not worth it. Let them figure out their own problems. And so the Lebanese civil war rages on for another 15 years, and they only resolve it when eventually they feel like they have to restart the whole governmental system and no longer reserve positions for Christians or Muslims. They don't make it secular per se, but it's more secular than it ever had been. All right, so we've got Israel and the Yom Kippur War. We got a civil war going on in Lebanon. What else could we throw on top of this in the Middle East? A revolution in Iran. Remember, Iran is right here next to the Arabian Peninsula. And it's important to remember that Iran, they are not Arabs. And so while they have a common religion and common interests in terms of they also have oil resources like others, they're really not the same as the Arabs. And in Iran, remember, they had been under heavy Western influence. You go back and remember the British and the Americans had been basically getting good deals on oil since they overthrew the Shah, they supported the Shah and overthrew the Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh back in the 1950s. And so Iran's under heavy influence from the West, and their nation had westernized. A lot of their institutions, their culture, the essentially the treatment of women, their clothing styles had become very westernized. And the westernization, though, was really rubbing some people the wrong way. Extremely conservative Muslims in Iran were not happy with the Shah, who was still in power. The Shah, remember, that means the king. The Shah is in charge of the country, and they really don't like the direction that he's going. The Shah has allowed the westernization of the country. He's allowed Western powers like Great Britain and the United States to exploit the nation's resources and interfere with their internal politics, and so they're pretty frustrated. The Shah also could be very brutal in repressing and suppressing people who spoke out against him, using violence if necessary. And so people start taking to the streets in large quantities. There are mass protests against the Shah's rule and Western interference. And ultimately, a revolution occurs where the Shah is basically forced out of his country, and he's going to be replaced by this man, the Ayatollah. Ayatollah is a title. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. And Iran, under the Ayatollah, is going to establish a theocracy. The theocracy is a religious government. Whereas, for example, in the United States and most Western countries, we have secularized governments where religion and government, we keep them separate. No, for them, the Ayatollah is both a religious leader and he's a political leader. Now, Iran still has other governmental positions, like they still have a president, they still have a lawmaking body, but the Ayatollah is essentially in charge of the country. And a theocracy is an interesting approach. It's a radical change to what Iran had been. This really conservative group of Muslims strictly adhere to the Shia concept of Islam, and they're going to take their turn at repressing anybody who disagrees with them. They impose strict, basically rules, moral laws on the people there because they think that's more in line with what God wants them to do and how he wants them to live. And not only do they establish a theocracy, but the American embassy is overrun by some of these protesters and revolutionaries, and they actually take the people inside the American embassy hostage. You had more than 50 people who are held hostage for well over a year, and President Jimmy Carter ordered an attempt at rescuing these hostages, which fails dramatically, and later on Iran would free them, but not until Jimmy Carter is out of office. It's humiliating for the United States. It's also an embarrassment because Iran was strictly under American and British influence up until then, and then Iran has become a bit of an enemy. Today, in 2024, when I'm recording this, Iran and the United States still do not share embassies. We do not have standard diplomatic relations. We have a very tense relationship with Iran. And so they radically change who they are as a nation. We'll pick up with Southeast Asia and a little more madness in the next video.